A lot of Americans sort of shocked into consciousness about this recently. Though deep down, in fact, not even that deep down, you have to know that everywhere you go with your cell phone and everywhere you bink around on the interwebs, you know that that is recorded somehow, either by your provider or by the site you go to, least of all by your browser, if you don't know enough to delete the cookies. Or your URL history, but at least delete the cookies. Anyway, you know deep down that that's the truth. And then also, you also know, when you look around, there seem to be cameras everywhere. Are we under surveillance all the time? You've known about facial recognition software. There's no excuse to not know about that. Fresno was one of the test airports, I want to say. I think Fresno was one of the first places that put in facial recognition software at the airport, a public place. Anyway, there's a lot of people who are sitting up and taking notice. There's a lot of people who've known about this for a long time. Jeremy Kauffman is a co-organizer for a thing that happened today, Restore the Fourth, a protest that occurred at 1 p.m. at Pershing Square. Jeremy Kauffman, thanks for joining us here on KFI.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm sorry that my voice is a little hoarse. I've been leading chants throughout the afternoon.
Did you rhyme anything with hey, hey, ho, ho?
We sure did. And
don't. No, I don't even want to hear it. No, don't. But this is a real serious subject, one that I take very seriously. And so explain to people why they should be concerned. 'Cause there's a lot of people out there that say, well, if I'm out in the public place anyway, the Supreme Court says I have no reasonable expectation of privacy out in public. So explain to people why they should have a concern about that.
Sure. So before I go into that, why people should be concerned, I would like to just let you and your audience members know that the protest started at 1, although it's continuing here. We're now in Grand Park by the water fountain where they're having the 4th of July celebration. And so we've joined our fellow Americans in celebrating the 4th of July. And we're obviously celebrating it through an attempt to reclaim our constitutional rights. Now, in terms of, so if anybody would like to join us, we would love to have you. There's music and there's conversation. It's going to be great. In terms of why people should care, the Supreme Court cases that dealt with privacy rights haven't really caught up to the technology. And so when you're dealing with constitutional law, it seems like it's in need of a fundamental upgrade. Now, the bigger problem for me is that the executive branch, and this happened under the Bush years as well as the Obama years, is preventing, both administrations are preventing this from being reviewed by courts. And so you hear the president saying that we have meaningful oversight and transparency of these PRISM programs and whatnot, but it's been constantly kicked out of court and blocked by courts. And so what we want the Supreme Court to specifically analyze these programs.
Well, and also, but let me make a really fine point about something. Bush didn't run saying, I'm so upset with the way things are going, I'm going to make it right. Obama ran saying that Bush was shredding the Constitution, that he's going to make everything right, et cetera. And then it turns out he triples down on everything. And now he's putting his hands up saying, I'm shocked to discover this. And in the same press conference, he said, I'm glad that this is out in the public arena so we can debate it. But sure. No, I'm not going to answer your questions.
Sure. And I think that is more disappointing at least, but it's no less egregious because in both cases we have a president who was supposed to represent us and instead created and then under Obama expanded a surveillance program that was turned inward on its own citizens, on patriotic Americans like you and I and your audience members. And so I think it's more disappointing because those of us that were supporting Obama in 2008 and 2012, when reality struck and we realized that he was no different, it was a pretty hard blow.
And I guess what people need to internalize, what you need to just accept right now is that lying back and just allowing surveillance cameras to just pervade every aspect of our public life, you're giving consent to the federal government assuming in the morning when you wake up that you must be doing something wrong and that sure. The ball's in your court to show that you're not. And sure, I would ask anyone because there's a lot of people who say, well, I'm not, I have nothing to hide. Well, then would you have any problem with the camera in your bedroom? Well, of course you would. Because that's your private place. So you all have something to hide.
Right.
It's your privacy. But let me play the devil's advocate though. When I'm out on a public street, that is a public place. I have no expectation of a right to privacy out there.
Right. So yeah, well, when we're out on the street, we don't really expect that everything we do can be kept entirely private and secret. Although I'm really hard-pressed to believe that if you started talking to regular Americans, you know, the problem is this, right? It's when you combine the cameras with the surveillance of electronic communication, you start to see just how total it is. There's no space where we can go and be completely free from government surveillance. So I think that's the problem. And for anybody that might not have a reasonable expectation of privacy while in public, while that might be true, you also don't expect there to be, you know, databases of your movements, logging of your movements. And while we're not sure that that's happening now, it certainly seems within the realm of possibility.
But now,
and in terms of, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but in terms of people saying they have nothing to hide, I'd like to point out the historical example of Martin Luther King Jr., who, while fighting for civil rights and the end of Jim Crow segregation, was specifically targeted by the FBI for surveillance. They were bugging his house and his church and his hotel rooms.
Yeah, they recorded him having sex with people who were not his wife, which would be an affair.
Right.
And so obviously that puts him in a position where they could have blackmailed him.
Right. And they used it to undermine his movement. Right.
But now, so now let me ask you though, what does a protest do? I mean, besides, I mean, well, you tell me, what does a march do about this?
Okay, great. A march does a lot. The first thing it does is it shows people that have stayed home today or that are staying home normally. It shows them that there's nothing wrong with being upset about this. It shows for people who might be on the fence, for people who first heard this news and thought to themselves, had some sort of gut-wrenching feeling about this. And then the mainstream media comes in and sort of neutralizes it. Oh, it's no big deal. This happened under Bush. Don't worry. It's all in the name of terrorism. We've stopped X amount of terrorist attacks, so we're keeping you safe, and it's all worth it. So while the mainstream media and the institutions like the CIA and the FBI are trying to quell dissent, the marches have the opposite effect. It shows people watching on the news, if you're upset about this, you're right to be upset. You're not alone. You're right to be upset. And in fact, you should be out here in the street with us, showing how upset you are. And you know, in terms of what a march does, nonviolent movements, we could just look to the Arab Spring and specifically Egypt this week. And this is what you see when you get people in the streets and are engaging in nonviolent activism. You see President Morsi got ousted. He got ousted by the people in the street because the people in the street, and when the people in the street say, we do not support this, we do not support this leader, that's what happens.
Yeah, but that's a really horrible example to hang your hat on, though. It's really what needs to happen in this country has nothing to do with the Arab Spring or even that example. But I think
I think you're absolutely right. But I think what the Arab Spring shows is just how powerful protests are. Just how powerful people tend to dismiss the idea of the public gathering in a public square with signs and chanting. People tend to think of that as something for kids to do or something that's sort of futile.
Yeah, but those are
attitude as well.
Those are where they don't count your vote. Then you have to gamble that the security forces won't pull the trigger, and that's what they did from Tripoli, where they lost that bet in Cairo, et cetera. But here in the United States, though, my stance on this, as far as surveillance cameras go, is I understand when I go into a store, they have a right to protect their inventory and all that.
Sure.
In the United States, most surveillance video is videotape. Unless you're in Las Vegas or Reno, then there are live human beings watching you in real time. What scares me, and I don't know if you've ever been to London, but if anyone has ever traveled to London or you travel to London, you get out in the middle of any corner of London, look up on any corner of a building, and there are 3 or 4 cameras that are actually sending live feeds to Scotland Yard, to Metropolitan Police, where there is a live human being monitoring cameras. And that is right out of The Prisoner or Big Brother. That's the part that scares me. If that ever happens in America, if some police department ever wants to sit there and pay someone to look at a live feed, then I have a real problem. I want to defund that department.
Well, but you know, if I can just respectfully bring up this point to you, sir, I agree with you. That would be a serious problem. But an even bigger problem is, what do you do once you've already reached that point? That seems kind of like an event horizon where that's the point of the return. Because at that point, you can't really mobilize some sort of social protest movement because you'll get surveilled just like Martin Luther King Jr. did, even if you're doing it nonviolently and you're doing it justly and you have a just cause. And so I think, to say, but people...
Well, that's the point. By the way, here's the answer. The answer is you sue the living feces out of whatever municipality sets that system up. You go to court. In America, people in America we always tell these lawsuit stories as punchlines and jokes. I got to say, I've lived in countries where they resolve disputes with claymore mines. I like in America that we lawyer up. In this country, you can lawyer up, and if they have to pay out a big check, they'll get rid of it.
Sure, and if I can I agree with you. I think that's a great way to show some sort of direct action. It's like suing municipalities that try to bring up surveillance cameras in your communities. Because I could just address your point about voting. My only concern is that who's left to vote for? We had, like you said earlier, we had President Obama who got elected on a campaign of transparency and openness and accountability. And he did the exact opposite. He expanded all of the things that he was criticizing Bush for. So I have a feeling that it's not going to be as simple as just voting, pulling the lever, and then, falling asleep for another 4 years. I think we're going to have to be out in the streets. We're going to have to be demonstrating regularly, and we're going to have to be putting a lot of public pressure on the federal government so that they know we, the people, do not support what they're doing. This is an egregious erosion of the Constitution.
It is. I agree. I mean, I need to know specifically, which part of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments it is, but especially the PRISM program. And the other programs that are registering my call history, et cetera. But I will say this. If you ask people today, would you rather have 2013 connectivity where you can do a video Skype call, like in my case to my sister-in-law in Zambia, or would you give that up so that cameras go away or that your URL history is not recorded? And I got to say, I can't answer that right away. I'd have to think about it.
Sure. Well, so I think that's an interesting point, but I also think it's somewhat of a false choice because, first of all, our government is liable to the people and responsible to the people. And if we, the people, show them that we don't want this, they will roll it back. They will repeal the Patriot Act. They will launch an investigation into James Clapper and any other intelligence official who's lied before Congress, which is a felony. And, there's also tools you can use, like encryption. There's a web browser called the Tor browser. It's supported by the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Yeah, the Tor browser. If everyone used, it's called TOR. Use the Tor browser. It's a terrific browser. Also, Ccrypt is a great free South African encryption program. But I have to wrap up. But here, my final thing about this is that I just want to be treated like an adult, and I think that our government just should have announced back in 1998 when the NSA was setting this up in 99. If they had simply announced, "Hey, folks, as the internet expands into your phone, we're looking at the metadata." If they had just treated me like an adult, because that would have done two things: it would have treated me like an adult, and secondly, it would have deterred terrorists from using that. They would have had to use carrier pigeons and things like that.
Right. Well, they still would have used. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that I can get into the mind of a terrorist, and I think that's a good point. But I think, equally as important is that they didn't do it, right? So, what does it say? So their second justification for this program, immediately after saying that it was nothing new, Obama and the administration started saying that we need this. It needs to be secret, and we needed to protect. We need to protect Americans. And he's saying, I welcome this public debate, and it's worth it because we're saving all the lives. Here are all the terrorist attacks we've done. Like, if that's all true, why wasn't it brought up into the public realm before implemented, right? So it's like, that's not a democratic process. A democratic process would have been saying, look, we have this capability. We have the capability to construct a surveillance apparatus. And if we do, here's how many terrorist attacks will stop, and here's how many lives we think we'll save, and here's the kind of infringement it's going to be, and here's the kind of freedom you're going to have to give up. And then the public, as a democracy, as a republic, could have debated that, had people discussing that, and then decided what they wanted. Instead, it was constructed in secret, and we still wouldn't have known about it today if it weren't for Edward Snowden.
Yeah, and closed door center panels and et cetera, et cetera. All right, well, I have to go, you damn hippie, because we have to sell some commercials. So
I'm not a hippie, then. I'll clarify that for you. I'm a law student at the University of California, Los Angeles.
Hippie. All right, thanks for joining us. The march continues. You're where now?
We are in Grand Park, up by the fountain, and people are just sort of hanging out and talking about Fourth Amendment, and I think some people are handing out flyers to passerbys.
All right, Restore the Fourth.
Join us.
RestoreTheFourth.net. It's a agitation group about surveillance.